The old woman was always happy and dancing under the streetlight. What was her magic for happiness as her silver hair and thin body moved gracefully under the street lamp? How did she bring the neighborhood to life at night? In the hush of night, when the clock hands tiptoe toward midnight, an elderly figure named Beatrice makes her way down the gentle slope of a quiet suburban street, her slippered feet brushing the ground with a secret anticipation that only she can fully understand. Long since retired from her career as a ballroom dance instructor, she now finds the call of moonlit solitude irresistible, a subtle summons that tugs at her heart each evening when the last of the neighborhood lights flicker out. Her silver hair, twisted into a neat bun, catches the faint glow of the single street lamp like polished gossamer, radiating a soft halo that seems to transform her into a benevolent specter of merriment. Drawn by the time-worn rhythms etched into her memories, she glides onto the patch of pavement directly under that lamp, where the light pools on the ground in a circle that feels oddly like a stage awaiting a singular performer. It is here, in this small glowing space, that she begins her nightly routine, swaying first from side to side as if testing her balance against the night, then gradually increasing the breadth of her movements, allowing her arms to extend gracefully outward in an invitation for the stars to witness her private spectacle. Shadows weave around her slender form, cast by the faint halo of the street lamp, and with each sweep of her arms, they twirl in elongated shapes across the pavement, adding a ghostly duet partner to her silent waltz. Yet, silent is hardly the right word to describe this midnight ritual, for although no music can be heard by conventional standards, Beatrice's mind resonates with the echo of countless songs she once taught to young couples, singles seeking poise, and even the occasional wedding party eager for that perfect first dance. Each quiet pivot, each measured step, breathes life into a forgotten tune only she can hear, melding the present moment with a tapestry of memories that merge decades of teaching and performing into a single fluid motion. To the uninitiated observer peering from a window or passing by in a late-night car, the sight might appear peculiar or even whimsical, prompting more questions than answers. Why this quiet old woman with her refined posture, dancing in a circle of weak luminescence without an audience? But Beatrice is not dancing for applause or validation. She's dancing for the pure, unfiltered joy that wells up inside her, a kind of pulsating happiness that defies reason and breaks through the confines of solitude. Neighbors who first glimpsed her out their windows debated among themselves whether she had simply lost her senses, conjuring illusory orchestras in her mind, or whether she was mourning some long-lost partner in a gentle nightly ritual of remembrance. They whispered their theories over fences and in hushed telephone calls, trading stories about the graceful old woman who haunted the streets under the moon's mild gaze, intrigued by her radiant calmness and the magnetic pull of her hushed presence. Some suspected sorrow kept her awake, a grief so deep that dancing was the only way to shake free of it, while others believed she was chasing some ephemeral dream of youth, recapturing the steps she once mastered in the grandeur of ballrooms long ago. Little did they know that, as a teacher and performer, Beatrice had learned the transformative power of movement, how a simple sway or pivot could lift the human spirit beyond the heaviness of daily burdens, carrying it into an exalted realm where time, regret, and fear momentarily dissolved. Standing beneath the street lamp's glow, she feels the kind of lightness that can only be achieved by relinquishing concern for what others might think, relishing instead the private ecstasy of a moment owned entirely by the dancer. Despite her years and the physical wear that sometimes causes her knees to protest, she finds a deep well of energy each time she arrives at her midnight stage, an energy fueled not by youth but by the unshakable conviction that happiness blooms in the present. Under that lamp, her wrinkles reflect a gentle wisdom rather than a burden of age, and her eyes sparkle with something akin to mischievous delight as she executes a small flourish of her hand or a sudden, sweeping turn. Passers-by, on their way home from late-night shifts, occasionally slow down to watch, transfixed by the serenity that emanates from her rhythmic motions, and some even stop entirely, drawn in by a feeling of warmth that contrasts sharply with the chill of the night air. More than once, a curious onlooker has ventured to step closer, timidly entering the perimeter of lamplight, their heart pounding with the uncertainty of crossing that invisible boundary between spectator and participant. Without missing a beat, Beatrice offers a soft smile, extending her hand as though to welcome them into the dance, and in that small gesture an unspoken invitation is issued, bridging the gap between lonely soul and joyful reveler. The hush of the neighborhood amplifies the rustle of clothes and the faint tapping of shoes on asphalt. And though still no external melody is heard, the unity of two people finding a shared rhythm in the quiet street is music enough to dispel any doubts about this peculiar habit. She coaxes them gently with words of encouragement and a bright laughter that resembles the sparkle of chimes caught in a morning breeze, reminding them that dancing is less about perfect posture or sophisticated skill and more about immersing oneself in the delight of unguarded expression. One night, a security guard finishing his shift wandered upon the scene, his hefty flashlight bumping against his belt, and found himself so enraptured by the gentle swirl of her movements that he set aside his apprehensions to attempt a tentative spin at her side. In return, she guided him through a few basic steps once revered in her ballroom classes. Heel-toe transitions, light hand placement, the subtle shift of weight that keeps the dance fluid, and he found himself surprised by how natural it felt to be twirling under a street lamp at 1 a.m. with an 80-year-old partner. When he walked away, his spirit carried an unusual buoyancy, as though he had left behind some unseen baggage in that luminous circle, freed by the simple act of embracing a moment he never expected to experience. Beatrice's role as an unintentional mentor of midnight happiness quickly became a subject of whispered fascination among the neighborhood's more adventurous residents, who occasionally peeked through curtains to catch a glimpse of her nightly performance. Yet she remained blissfully unaware of the small, devoted audience that sometimes gathered behind the safety of drawn blinds or the tinted windows of parked cars, content to cultivate her piece of heaven under that single lamplight. The cement beneath her feet might as well have been polished marble, and the star-sprinkled sky her grand dome, for her surroundings took on a regal beauty in her imagination that transformed every subtle shift of the air into an applause, every swirling dust mote into a fellow dancer. In her mind's eye, she saw the joyous memories of her teaching days, the bright faces of students who discovered the thrill of partnering with another human being in perfect sync, and the vibrant swirl of fabrics and colors that once adorned the ballroom floors of her youth. She recalled the adrenaline rush of making that first slow turn with a brand new student, watching the disbelief in their eyes melt into amazement as they realized they were, in fact, capable of elegance they never thought possible. Night after night, these recollections twined seamlessly with the present, fueling her unwavering determination to keep dancing despite the questions or misconceptions people might harbor about her motives. Her body, though older, still responded to the subtle cues of her mind, and the interplay of muscle memory and joyful abandon created a mesmerizing effect that seemed to slow time under that solitary beam of light. Critics or naysayers who suspected that she was merely an eccentric old woman could hardly argue with the sheer contentment radiating from her eyes, a contentment so powerful that it seemed to wash gently over anyone who dared draw near. No matter how hectic the day had been or what aches and pains threatened to hold her back, the moment her feet connected with that circle of light, Beatrice felt a deep and resonant hope that transcended the limitations of everyday life. Sometimes, when the neighborhood was still wide awake, a distant rumble of cars and bustling voices blended with the hush of the night, reminding her that people everywhere were consumed by their obligations and responsibilities, while she danced freely in a realm of her own creation. Yet rather than judge them for not stopping to join her, she only wished that each rushing soul might someday find a flicker of joy amid their routines, a quiet reprieve where they could reconnect with the innocence of simply being present. In a world often overshadowed by deadlines and incessant demands, this illuminated patch of asphalt stood as a humble sanctuary, a place where worries could be set aside for a few precious minutes of unabashed happiness. Beatrice never set out to transform her late-night habit into a spectacle or a source of inspiration, but each spin of her skirt and each measured sway of her arms slowly wove a tapestry of hope that beckoned the weary-hearted to come closer. Under the watchful gaze of the moon, her midnight dance took on the shape of a silent sermon on the inexhaustible nature of joy, reminding anyone who witnessed it that the simplest of gestures could unlock an entire universe of delight. Though she was merely one woman moving through the darkness in a quiet, unremarkable neighborhood, her graceful presence at the stroke of midnight planted the seeds of a new awareness, one that hinted at the magical possibility of finding happiness in the most unlikely places, and showed how even a flicker of light in the gloom could guide us to our better selves. As the nights wore on, Beatrice's solitary dance under the yellow glow of that humble street lamp began to create ripples of quiet fascination through the neighborhood, drawing out the curiosity in those who once dismissed her nightly ritual as a mere oddity observed from behind closed blinds. Word spread softly, first among restless children peeking out of their bedroom windows past bedtime, then from one adult to another, their subdued whispers wondering if Beatrice's late-night dancing might be more than just an eccentric quirk. A nurse who worked the graveyard shift at the local hospital found herself steering her car down that particular street more frequently, hoping to catch even a glimpse of the ethereal figure whose graceful silhouette offered a comforting reminder that beauty could be found in the simplest of places. One evening, that same nurse parked her car along the curb, drawn by an inexplicable magnetism, her weary eyes brightening as she beheld Beatrice's gentle waltz performed in near silence beneath the faint hum of the lamp. When Beatrice invited her closer with nothing more than a kind smile, the nurse hesitated, feeling self-conscious of her rumpled scrubs and disheveled hair, but eventually she yielded to the warmth emanating from those outstretched arms. As they danced, the nurse felt the tension in her shoulders melt away, replaced by a soft wonder that made her realize how rarely she allowed herself to unwind in such a genuine, unguarded manner. Once the dance ended, Beatrice squeezed the nurse's hand and told her, in a voice still buoyant from years of teaching newcomers how to relax into the flow of music, that small moments of connection were often the cure for a tired heart. From that point on, the nurse made it a quiet personal ritual to visit Beatrice at least once a week, each time bringing the stories of the night's shift, tales of frantic patients, exhausted doctors, and the rare instance of hope amidst the chaos, stories that Beatrice drank in with sympathetic eyes and an open heart. In return, the nurse found a salve for her mental exhaustion, a tranquil solace in moving her feet beside a woman who seemed to have distilled life's complexities into these enchanting midnight steps. Soon, others began to approach the street lamp with cautious curiosity, like moths drawn to a flame, reluctant at first but emboldened by the gentle way Beatrice met every new arrival with acceptance. A teenage boy juggling the stress of upcoming exams and the unspoken weight of expectations started sneaking out of his room at night, not to cause mischief or roam aimlessly, but to observe this mysterious old woman who danced as if the moon had personally called her to the stage. He lingered just beyond the halo of light for several evenings, building up the courage to say hello, until Beatrice's watchful gaze silently invited him into the circle with a nod so understanding it unraveled the tight knot in his chest. Though self-conscious and uncertain in his first awkward steps, he soon found that Beatrice's patient guidance opened a small door in his mind, one through which new possibilities fluttered in. The idea that stress could sometimes be eased through a simple pivot, a breath, or an unself-conscious twirl in the dark. Before long, the boy was sharing stories of teachers, tests, and the tiny heartbreaks that accompany adolescence, only to receive gentle encouragement and the occasional anecdote from Beatrice's own youth, much of which, he learned, had been spent perfecting her footwork in drafty, mirror-lined studios. In these quiet talks he found not just a dance partner but a confidant, a person who met his burdens and anxieties with a compassion that never seemed forced or judgmental, and it filled him with a sense of belonging he seldom felt elsewhere. Emboldened by these small successes, a trickle of night shift workers, bus drivers, bakers, security guards, found themselves passing by intentionally, no longer chalking up their curiosity to coincidence, but actively seeking the reprieve of Beatrice's gentle company. Some brought leftover pastries or cups of tea, presenting them like humble offerings at a sacred altar, while others came empty-handed, carrying only a wish for a brief escape from the relentless churn of daily responsibilities. Under the soft glow, Beatrice's steps became a universal language, transcending differences in age, occupation, and personality, allowing strangers to unite in a fleeting moment of shared purpose, to forget life's complexities and remember the childlike glee that emerges when the body moves freely to a rhythm, even if that rhythm exists only in one's imagination. Many a night, the hush of her unspoken melody was punctuated by quiet laughter or murmurs of wonder, as neighbors who had seen each other only in passing found themselves, perhaps for the first time, face to face and heart to heart. A postal worker still in uniform once remarked that, despite having delivered mail in the area for years, he had never actually spoken with half the people whose mailboxes he filled, but there under the lamplight he recognized them as fellow souls thirsty for a moment of connection. Through Beatrice's kindness, these fleeting acquaintanceships blossomed into friendships, strengthened by the shared vulnerability of dancing together under the open sky without fear of judgment or the pressure to perform. The gravitational pull of Beatrice's unwavering warmth even reached a young couple struggling to balance the demands of new parenthood, They ventured out one restless evening, exhausted and eager for any form of relief, only to discover an unexpected refuge in the company of this gentle white-haired muse. While their infant slept at home under the watchful eye of a grandmother, they clasped each other's hands with a renewed tenderness, swaying slowly in the precious quiet, as Beatrice hummed a lullaby-like tune that seemed to soothe the frayed edges of their nerves. In that moment, it wasn't about learning elegant dance steps or showing off any prowess, but rather about remembering that tenderness and presence could mend many small rifts in a relationship. They thanked her profusely afterward, tears of gratitude shining in their eyes, and Beatrice simply smiled, her own heart brimming with the quiet satisfaction that comes from helping others rediscover fragments of joy tucked away beneath the day's burdens. Word began to reach those who, despite living only blocks away, had never met their neighbors or noticed the subtle grandeur of their midnight surroundings, and this newfound awareness sparked a gentle wave of communal curiosity that only grew stronger with each passing night. One by one, insomniacs who normally paced their rooms in restless agitation decided to step outside, drawn by something intangible and yet immensely comforting in the stories they'd heard of the old woman dancing in the lamp's circle of light. Some came trembling, haunted by personal losses or health worries, but found themselves unexpectedly comforted by the sight of Beatrice's steadfast calm, swaying without self-consciousness as though the entire universe was a supportive partner in her dance. With each visitor, Beatrice patiently extended the same invitation: "Would you like to join me?" Even if they declined and simply chose to sit on a nearby bench, the hush of the neighborhood fused with her soothing movements, creating an ambient atmosphere that encouraged introspection and release. Bit by bit, a fledgling community formed around these late-night encounters, united not by any formal agreement but by the unspoken yearning to feel something genuine in a world often dominated by superficiality. Here, in the intangible glow that mingled moonlight with street lamp radiance, differences in background or belief found a rare and tender harmony, as if the nightly gatherings themselves were an unspoken reminder that every human being craves acceptance and understanding. On occasion, music did find its way into the circle, brought by a local jazz enthusiast who toted his portable speaker and set it near the lamp, tentatively choosing soft, soulful tunes that seemed to complement the gentle hush of the street. When those lilting notes floated into the stillness, people who had once watched from a distance discovered a spark of confidence, a musical anchor that emboldened them to surrender to the moment. Yet Beatrice herself rarely relied on these external melodies. She seemed to carry within her an archive of old swing tunes, waltzes, and Latin rhythms, each stored away in her memory like treasured gems to be retrieved at will. This quiet library of music in her mind, paired with her innate ability to guide the anxious or untrained, made every person feel as if they too possessed the spark of a dancer simply waiting to be kindled. A bus driver with a shaky sense of rhythm found himself gently coached in a playful two-step, which, though awkward at first, soon blossomed into a surprisingly graceful pattern once he let go of the fear of looking foolish. A middle-aged woman who had always considered herself clumsy was amazed to find her feet moving in harmony with Beatrice's subtle signals, discovering an unspoiled corner of herself that reveled in movement and gentle music. Laughter often erupted in the circle of light, a warm, sustaining laughter that defied the seriousness of daily life and broke down the barriers of unfamiliarity between participants. When hands inevitably slipped or partners stumbled, Beatrice's patient encouragement kept the atmosphere joyful rather than embarrassing, and thus new bonds were formed in the shared acknowledgement of human imperfection. Night by night, the lamp's glow became a sort of beacon for those in need of a reminder that small joys matter, and in these tiny acts of connection, a renewed sense of community and hope began to spread beyond the circle of dancers. The local bakery started leaving small baskets of fresh bread at the corner each evening, grateful for the new customers who passed by in jovial spirits after they finished a dance with Beatrice. A retired teacher began penning down small haikus about the wonders of moonlit movement, posting them on a community board to encourage others to step out of their comfort zones. One older neighbor, initially wary and somewhat cranky about the late-night commotion, found himself enthralled after a chance encounter when Beatrice noticed him leaning on his cane, watching quietly from across the street. She approached him with a gentleness that left no room for rejection, and though his limbs were stiff from years of disuse, he managed a slow shuffle in time with her steps, surprising them both with the flood of nostalgia for days he thought long forgotten. Tears, once locked behind the barriers of pride and isolation, spilled freely that night, and by the end of the improvised dance, the old man had found not just relief but a friend. Despite the varied backgrounds and personal histories that converged beneath that humble lamp, the common thread was the invitation to rediscover wonder in a space unburdened by expectations. Each night's interactions left an afterglow that lingered far beyond the pavement, traveling in whispered stories and renewed optimism to living rooms and workplaces alike. A sense of shared ownership grew around this extraordinary nocturnal phenomenon, and people began to wonder if perhaps the street lamp had always held a secret capacity for enchantment, waiting only for someone like Beatrice to awaken its magical potential. A phenomenon that started with hushed gossip and guarded curiosity blossomed into a loosely woven tapestry of human connection, strands of which reached from lonely hearts to overworked souls, across generational divides and into hidden pockets of longing. The shadowy edges of the neighborhood seemed to recede, replaced by a gentle aura that beckoned the fearful and hesitant closer, reassuring them that no story was too heavy, no worry too inconsequential for Beatrice's attentive ear and unwavering compassion. Some visitors brought their burdens to her as one might bring an offering to an oracle, speaking haltingly of their doubts and disappointments, only to have their anxieties eased by the simple yet profound act of moving in sync with another human being. And through it all, Beatrice never claimed to be anything more than a former dance instructor who happened to believe that joy was an ever-present friend, ready to bloom if only we would give it a place to unfold. It was precisely this humility that made her presence so magnetic, for she reminded everyone she encountered that the pursuit of happiness need not be grand or complicated, that it could flourish even under the dim light of a lonely street lamp at midnight. Even the simplest gestures, a faint smile, an earnest attempt to follow her lead, a deep breath on a chilly evening, became a form of silent prayer, a tiny but significant nod to the inherent beauty woven into the ordinary. Over time, a quiet expectation filled the air each evening, as though the night itself held its breath until Beatrice arrived, ready to shepherd those lingering passers-by into an experience of shared wonder. If anyone questioned the practicality or sensibility of devoting these late hours to dance, the joyful faces of those who left that circle soon provided a resounding answer. Though brief, those moments of connection had a lasting impact, renewing weary minds and rekindling hope in hearts left stale by routine. And so, the street lamp corner remained a testament to how even the smallest of places could become the birthplace of transformation, proving that the boundary between solitude and fellowship could be crossed by a single step and a single smile. Night after night, old and young, battered and hopeful, found a piece of themselves reflected in Beatrice's gentle movements, and that reflection breathed new life into corners of their hearts that had long been shuttered. In the hush of the midnight air, with the stars as their only spectators, this growing tapestry of lives intertwined in a silent celebration of humanity, carrying each dancer and observer one step closer to a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to find happiness in every situation. These intimate encounters built up gradually, allowing the neighborhood to shed its air of isolation and distrust, embracing instead a sense of shared destiny that was nurtured by simple gestures of warmth, acceptance, and joy. Indeed, it became nearly impossible for a late-night dog walker or a postal worker on an early route to pass by the lamp and not be tempted to pause, to wonder, or to smile at the enchanting sight of a woman who had turned an ordinary patch of concrete into a living portrait of connection. And while no official sign or banner announced the meeting place, hearts throughout the neighborhood knew where to find solace on nights when they felt invisible or overwhelmed, guided by the gentle glow that merged moonlight and electricity into a beacon of compassion. From that point on, the midnight lamp was rarely without some form of human presence, be it a dance, a quiet conversation, or a simple hug that meant the world to someone who felt utterly alone just moments before. And still at the center of it all, Beatrice remained unfailingly gracious, offering each newcomer a chance to discover that within them existed a tiny spark of joy, a spark that only needed a moment of freedom to kindle into a light bright enough to chase away the shadows of doubt. Thus, the small moments of connection she nurtured became the threads that wove together a community, and in the growing interplay of shared stories and twirling feet, people rediscovered a truth often lost in the hustle of daily life, that happiness is not a destination, but an ongoing dance, waiting to be stepped into whenever we allow ourselves to let go and simply be. In the quieter hours of the night, When the darkness seems to echo the loneliest corners of the human heart, Beatrice's nightly vigil under the old street lamp becomes a beacon for those who have lost their sense of direction. What begins as a fleeting glimpse of her dancing silhouette often pulls in individuals weighed down by burdens too heavy for daylight conversations, compelling them to approach in the hope of finding some intangible solace. Among these wanderers is a woman named Evelyn, who stumbles upon Beatrice's improvised dance floor one night, tears still wet on her cheeks from a recent heartbreak she hasn't dared voice aloud. At first, she hesitates, hovering at the very edges of the lamplight as though touching it might sear her with a hope she fears she can no longer carry. Yet Beatrice notices the trembling in Evelyn's posture, and with a gentle beckoning gesture she coaxes her into the circle, offering no questions, only a patient acceptance that feels as warm as a long-awaited embrace. Awkwardly, Evelyn places her hand in Beatrice's outstretched palm, finding the old woman's grip surprisingly firm, and soon she is following a series of steps that, though slow and tentative, loosen the knot of despair that has coiled in her chest for weeks. With each pivot she allows herself a fraction more trust, tears falling silently as Beatrice whispers encouragement so soft they seem to float on the night air, reminders that no sorrow is permanent and that the heart, like a muscle, can recover its strength through patience and movement. When the dance ends, Evelyn clings to Beatrice for just a moment longer, as though the older woman's steady presence might shield her from the world's unrelenting demands, and for the first time in ages, she realizes she is no longer afraid to let her tears be seen. Night after night she returns, forging a friendship that transforms her darkest hours into an intimate classroom of healing, where the steps of a waltz or a tango double as markers for regaining her emotional balance. While Evelyn finds solace in this newfound ritual, others appear at the circle in an even more precarious state, teetering between hopelessness and a faint desire for any sign that life still offers kindness. One such visitor is a disheveled man named Noah, who has recently lost his job and is too ashamed to confide in anyone else, haunted by the belief that he has somehow failed at living. Even though the hour is late, he wanders aimlessly through the neighborhood, each footstep feeling like it has no true destination, until he spots the gentle swirl of Beatrice's dress under the lamplight. Something in the scene, a small swirl of dust motes drifting in the glow, or perhaps the soft confidence in Beatrice's stance, convinces him to stop heart-pounding to watch from a cautious distance. He doesn't dare join in at first, convinced that he's not worth the trouble, but Beatrice senses his presence in that uncanny way she has of noticing any flicker of pain in the shadows. She edges closer, letting her steps slow, and quietly asks if he'd like to learn a simple turn, a question that initially startles him because it suggests he might still be capable of learning anything at all. Despite his trembling voice, he reluctantly places a hand on her shoulder, and in that moment, the old woman's unwavering calm acts as a temporary balm for the deep cuts in his self-esteem. Together they move in what can only be described as an improvised shuffle, his feet barely lifting off the ground, but the significance of the movement is profound. With every inch of progress, Noah begins to feel less like a burden and more like a participant in life's dance. Their silent exchange is unbroken by pity or forced cheer. Instead, Beatrice gives him the precious gift of normalcy, treating him as though he were just another learner discovering the thrill of dancing under an open sky. That night, Noah departs with a spark in his eyes, not a complete solution to his problems, but at least the beginnings of a belief that he is still part of the world he had nearly convinced himself to abandon. For some, the draw of Beatrice's midnight circle comes only after exhaustion has stripped them of their emotional armor, rendering them vulnerable in ways they never anticipated. A middle-aged mother named Rachel, burdened by the relentless daily care of her chronically ill son, arrives at the street lamp one night carrying both guilt and resentment in equal measure, emotions that scare her because she fears they make her a bad parent. She doesn't speak of her struggles at first, but Beatrice reads the lines of fatigue around her eyes and gently offers a slow, soothing dance that requires almost no steps, just a sway that acts like a lullaby for the soul. As they sway together, Rachel finally voices the guilt she has kept bottled up inside, the anger at fate for placing such a heavy responsibility on her shoulders, the terror that she might fail her son, and the deep sadness that gnaws at her each time she watches him suffer. Beatrice's response is neither overly sympathetic nor dismissively cheerful. Rather, it is a steady compassion that reassures Rachel that her emotions do not make her unworthy of love or incapable of being a good mother. Under that single lamp, with the moon bearing quiet witness, Rachel finds a small measure of reprieve from the harsh self-judgments that have grown like weeds in her mind. And though the dance is short, it plants a seed of resilience in her heart. Others come bearing wounds that are not visible, like Marcus, whose wife of 30 years recently passed away, leaving behind an emptiness so vast he can scarcely articulate it. He stumbles through his nights in a haze of loneliness, haunted by echoes of the life they once shared, until he catches sight of Beatrice's graceful figure illuminated by the faint halo of yellow light. Something about her reminds him of his late wife, perhaps the quiet elegance or the unwavering dignity that anchors her every step, and he lingers at the edge of the sidewalk, tears slipping unchecked down his cheeks. When she finally turns to him, her eyes brim with genuine empathy, and in that silent moment he realizes he doesn't have to justify his pain. She offers him her hand and he takes it with a trembling nod, silently recalling the times he used to dance in his own kitchen, barefoot and carefree, with a partner he thought would always be by his side. Though his movements are stiff and haunted by grief, Beatrice's acceptance acts like a guiding thread through the labyrinth of mourning, reminding him that love, once felt, never truly vanishes. In the gentle companionship of their dance, Marcus feels a faint but vital remembrance of how it felt to share a moment of wordless connection with someone who understands that sorrow and joy often reside in the same heart. With time, the circle becomes a place where these lost souls not only come to find solace but also connect with one another, forging new bonds out of shared vulnerability. It is here that a withdrawn teenager who has been bullied at school might meet a widowed pensioner who lost his wife to a sudden illness, each discovering that empathy can bridge their generational gap in ways they never thought possible. It is here that an overworked social worker, burnt out from endless cases of pain and trauma, might hold hands with a recovering addict who is taking life one precarious step at a time, learning together that hope can be rekindled through the brief, gentle contact of a dance. Instead of being defined by their suffering, each newcomer to the circle finds an opportunity to redefine themselves through the act of shared motion, be it a clumsy two-step or a heartfelt turn that stumbles more often than it glides. Beatrice, for her part, never judges anyone's skill or story. She seems to operate on an unspoken understanding that in the choreography of life, every stumble is simply another chance to regain one's balance. What emerges from these encounters is a network of subtle yet profound support. A web of caring that extends beyond the pool of light into private conversations, phone calls, and coffee meetups initiated by people who once believed they had nothing to offer. Countless nights, you might find 2 or 3 such souls gathered at the circle, supporting one another in ways that are almost invisible to an outsider. A soft pat on the shoulder here, a word of encouragement there, a tear wiped away under the guise of adjusting a shoe. The neighborhood, once a collection of separate houses inhabited by people who often kept their troubles hidden, gradually becomes a place where burdens are shared and joys multiplied. Through the gentle guidance of Beatrice's steps, even those who arrive feeling broken find that there is a space carved out for them to heal, or at least to breathe without the crushing weight of isolation. As friendships form in this nocturnal sanctuary, the lost and the lonely discover they are not alone after all, that sometimes the warmth of a single hand extended in kindness can thaw the frost of despair. Even when she is tired or aching from the demands of age, Beatrice never turns anyone away, drawing on an inner wellspring of compassion that seems to deepen every time she helps another person find their footing. Although she never explicitly calls herself a counselor or a mentor, her natural empathy and her unspoken invitation to be vulnerable make the circle a safe space for unveiling the rawest parts of one's soul. As the stories accumulate like treasures in her memory, Beatrice weaves them into her dancing, carrying the weight of others' hopes and sorrows with a stoic grace that seems almost transcendent. Over time, the circle becomes more than just an unusual spectacle under a single lamp. It transforms into a living tapestry of second chances, where people come not only to dance but to remember how to believe in themselves again. Even the simple act of standing within that beam of light, letting the stillness of the night wrap around them, has a meditative quality that soothes frayed nerves and frenzied hearts. From mild insomniacs to those tormented by guilt or regret, the lost find their way here with surprising regularity, sometimes drawn by pure curiosity, but more often guided by a quiet hope that they might catch a glimpse of salvation in the swirl of Beatrice's skirts. Over time, local rumor morphs into quiet legend, and people begin to describe the midnight lamp as a place where lost souls are guided gently back to themselves, where tears can be shed without shame, and where fears transform into new beginnings. The teenagers who once snickered at the notion of dancing with someone their grandmother's age now revere Beatrice as a guardian spirit of the neighborhood, respectfully bowing out of their cynicism when they see the genuine impact her presence has on friends who have faced heartbreak or disappointment. In these fleeting moments, the boundaries between teacher and student, helper and helped, dissolve, and what remains is a shared humanity, raw and unfiltered, illuminated by an unassuming glow that seems to hold the entire universe in that small patch of asphalt. Those who come to the circle often describe feeling as though they have entered a liminal space, somewhere between dream and reality, where the usual constraints of time and social convention lose their grip. Here, sorrow and joy spin together in a strange, bittersweet dance, forging a new kind of hope that is neither naive nor grandiose, but firmly rooted in the gentle truth that hearts can mend if given a chance to beat in unison. Lives once marked by loneliness begin intertwining in subtle, unexpected ways. A shared cup of tea the next day, a check-in phone call, the start of a supportive text message chain, all proof that the solace found under the lamp can reach well beyond the midnight hour. Even those who initially come to observe, drawn more by curiosity than need, find themselves unexpectedly moved by the raw honesty that surfaces when barriers are lowered and hearts speak their truths through movement. Some nights, when the moon is high and the breeze carries the distant scent of jasmine, the circle hums with unspoken confessions and heartfelt consolations, as if the heavens themselves conspire to ensure that these lost souls can finally find their way home. And though Beatrice never boasts about the countless transformations she has quietly nurtured, she radiates a humble gratitude for the chance to connect with each new face, to witness the astonishing resilience that emerges when people allow themselves to be truly seen. Through it all, she keeps dancing, gently reminding everyone that life's most profound truths can sometimes only be understood through the body's intuitive rhythm, a language that transcends words and touches the core of our being. By the time dawn hints at its arrival, those who gathered under the lamp find a renewed courage to face their tomorrows, buoyed by the tangible memory of a silent waltz, a comforting hand, or a listening ear that refused to judge. In this way, the circle offers a nightly testament to the concept of rebirth, where even the most broken hearts learn that they can still find a steady beat, one that promises more than just survival. It promises the possibility of joy. So when lost souls drift through the darkness of the neighborhood, it is no accident that they eventually gravitate toward the pool of light where Beatrice waits, her body swaying in fluid arcs of acceptance and empathy. For them, that circle is not merely a place to dance. It is a sanctuary where they can lay down their burdens, if only for the length of a song, and begin to remember that their stories are far from over. Each success story, each fragile breakthrough, adds to the growing legend of what one old woman's kindness can do, teaching the neighborhood again and again that the simplest gestures can leave the most profound imprints on the human soul. And in this perpetual meeting of the weary and the hopeful, Beatrice stands at the crossroads of heartache and healing, guiding even the most uncertain steps into the slow, deliberate motion of renewed faith. Night after night, she reaffirms the lesson that when life scatters us like autumn leaves in the wind, the smallest shared moment, like a dance under a dim street lamp, can guide us back toward the path of wholeness. As she gracefully turns, face uplifted toward the sky, those who watch can almost see the weight of countless sorrows gently lifted into the night air, melding with the soft hush of starlight and drifting into memory. The circle thus becomes a living testament to what can happen when compassion meets willingness, when the arms of a stranger are open wide, ready to receive another's pain and spin it into a fleeting, wondrous glimpse of hope. It is in these moments, these one-of-a-kind encounters, that the phrase "lost souls" stops meaning those who are irredeemably adrift, and instead becomes a tribute to the resilience found in every human heart, given the proper invitation to reclaim its inner light. More than once, someone has dubbed the circle a kind of impromptu confessional, but it remains so much more. A living mosaic of shattered pieces reassembled through compassion, a quiet yet powerful promise that no life is ever truly beyond repair. And still, Beatrice never asks for anything in return, never tries to mold others into her image. Rather, she dedicates herself to showing that empathy and patience can bring forth the hidden capacity for happiness that resides even in the darkest corners of our souls. Ultimately, each person who arrives under that street lamp leaves carrying a renewed sense of self, as though in Dancing with Beatrice, they have touched upon some universal truth that assures them they do not have to wander aimlessly in the night. Shoulders relax, tears dry, and faint smiles emerge as their hearts soften, reminded that hope remains steadfast, waiting to be embraced as soon as someone dares to extend a hand. This is how the lost souls find their way in the hush of the neighborhood's midnight streets, through the power of one woman's unwavering presence, a gentle reminder that every person holds a spark of possibility, ready to be fanned into brilliance by the tender dance of human connection. Before she became the nightly fixture dancing under that dimly lit street lamp, Beatrice led a life filled with twists and turns that molded her into the empathetic soul capable of bringing hope to the lonely hours of midnight. She was born in a small coastal town where seagulls cried overhead and salt drifted in on every breeze, and it was there that her fascination with movement first took shape as she watched the rhythmic swaying of sailboats in the harbor. Her mother, a kind-hearted woman who worked long days mending fishing nets, often hummed lullabies that Beatrice unconsciously converted into tiny dance steps on the weather-beaten floorboards of their cottage, marking the humble beginnings of what would become a lifelong passion. As she grew older, Beatrice's family relocated to a bustling city, a place of tall buildings and crowded sidewalks, and although the grid of urban life felt overwhelming at times, she discovered a ballet studio nestled between two towering apartments. Each time she peeked inside, seeing the young dancers in pristine tutus attempting pirouettes under their instructor's watchful eye, a spark of longing ignited within her, and she vowed that one day she would step onto that polished floor and learn to harness the music in her bones. Determined and unflinching, she signed up for free community classes, where she promptly discovered her love extended beyond just ballet. It encompassed every style of dance, from the delicate waltz to the lively swing and the sultry tango. She saved every spare coin she earned from delivering newspapers and scrubbing dishes at the local diner, each penny inching her closer to another lesson, another chance to refine her moves and feed the fire that danced in her heart. Her first instructor, Madame Ivanska, was a stern but nurturing figure who recognized Beatrice's raw talent and encouraged her to pursue her dreams, often staying after class to drill technique into the girl's eager limbs. In those sessions, Beatrice learned the discipline that came with each position of the feet, each alignment of the spine, but she also discovered the profound joy that exploded in her chest when she found the precise grace of a movement. Despite her family's modest means, she was occasionally gifted used ballet shoes from older students, which she treasured like rare jewels, mending the frayed ribbons by hand late into the night. By the time she was a teenager, her small bedroom had become a private studio, its walls lined with mirrors scavenged from thrift shops, each one reflecting her dedication and fueling her ambition. Yet life is seldom linear, and Beatrice's dreams were momentarily put on hold when her father fell ill, forcing her to take on more odd jobs to help keep the household afloat. She threw herself into these responsibilities without complaint, but whenever she had a spare moment, she would waltz through the tiny living room, weaving an invisible partner through the air, never letting her passion for dance grow cold. The hardship taught her resilience, a trait that would become the steel foundation of her character, and she carried that resolve with her when she finally earned a scholarship to a renowned dance academy. In those hallowed halls, she studied under some of the city's finest teachers, honing not just the technical aspects of dance, but also learning how expression and connection could infuse every step with life. Fellow students marveled at her dedication, claiming she practiced more hours than anyone else, often seen in the studio well after classes had ended, her feet wrapped in bandages as she pushed herself to master each routine. In time, her talent caught the eye of a traveling performance troupe, and for a brief, exhilarating period in her 20s, Beatrice lived the life of a professional dancer, traveling across state lines to perform for dazzled audiences. She reveled in the applause and the thrill of the stage lights, yet behind the curtains she began to yearn for a simpler kind of dance, one that focused more on personal connection than on flamboyant feats designed to impress a crowd. As her desire shifted, she found herself returning to her roots, to the heartfelt waltzes and more intimate partner dances that she had once practiced in tiny studios, discovering a deeper sense of fulfillment in teaching rather than performing. Around this time, she met a fellow dancer named Arthur, whose easy laughter and quick wit charmed her instantly, and they formed a bond that transcended the stage. They would stay late after rehearsals, dancing by moonlight on empty floors, sharing whispered dreams about opening a ballroom studio of their own someday. a haven where anyone from novices to experts could come and rediscover the joy of movement. Eventually, they pooled their resources and took a leap of faith, renting a modest space above a local cafe, naming it the Velvet Room in homage to the plush red curtains they found at a flea market and lovingly installed themselves. Classes started small, mostly friends and acquaintances who wanted to support the couple's dream, but word spread quickly about the warmth and humor with which Beatrice and Arthur taught their students. It was in that room, filled with scuffed floors and the faint aroma of coffee drifting up through the vents, that Beatrice honed the teaching style that would later guide lost souls toward hope under a solitary street lamp. She emphasized not just the steps but the emotional core of dance, how every pivot and flourish could tell a story, how each partnership required trust and kindness, and how laughter and mistakes often went hand in hand on the path to learning. Students flocked to them, some preparing for weddings, others trying to escape the drudgery of daily life, and a few discovering for the first time a sense of freedom they never knew they craved. For years, the Velvet Room thrived as a hub of creativity, fostering both technique and confidence in its patrons, until unforeseen circumstances threatened to close its doors. When a family emergency demanded that Arthur travel abroad to care for his ailing mother, Beatrice found herself juggling the studio's finances and classes almost entirely on her own. It was a grueling period that tested the limits of her endurance, and though she fought valiantly to keep the studio afloat, a series of compounding debts forced her to close the shutters one final time, an act that felt akin to losing a piece of her soul. The heartbreak of shuttering the Velvet Room, compounded by Arthur's prolonged absence, sent her into a period of deep introspection, during which she questioned her own worth and the meaning of her passion in a world that often prioritized profit over art. Yet out of those ashes she forged a new understanding. The essence of dance did not lie in grand studios or polished stages, but in the powerful bond it could create between human beings, whether they were novices or virtuosos. That realization inspired her to continue teaching on a smaller scale, offering private lessons in community centers and local halls, focusing on the people who truly needed the healing touch of dance, rather than those seeking mere spectacle. She found herself working with teenagers struggling with self-esteem, retirees searching for a renewed sense of purpose, and even stressed-out office workers desperate for a reprieve from their relentless schedules. Each time Beatrice witnessed a student's first hesitant smile upon mastering a sequence, or the tears of relief when someone discovered that their body was not an obstacle but a conduit for expression, she felt a renewed conviction that her calling extended far beyond running a dance studio. It was a calling that would stay with her into her golden years, long after her back had begun to ache and her hair had turned a silvery white. A calling centered on harnessing joy in the face of adversity, one step at a time. Eventually, Arthur returned, his own spirit fatigued by loss and family obligations, but the couple's reunion was bittersweet, as the dream they once shared no longer had the same framework to anchor it in reality. While the romance they shared remained, they both sensed that life had ushered them into a new chapter, one in which the wide-eyed ambitions of youth had softened into a more introspective desire to serve others in smaller, more personal ways. They spent their evenings reminiscing over quiet dinners, cherishing memories of a time when the applause of an audience felt like oxygen, and discovering an abiding comfort in each other's company. As the years progressed, they faced more losses. Dear friends passed away, relatives grew distant, and the unstoppable tide of time began carving its marks into their faces. Through each storm, dance remained a shared language that tethered them to hope, whether in the form of a slow waltz in the living room or a spontaneous twirl in the kitchen. Even after Arthur's own health began to decline, eventually confining him to a wheelchair, Beatrice found creative ways to keep the rhythm alive, letting him tap his hand on a small drum while she moved around him, each beat a promise that neither time nor circumstance could sever the thread of their connection. When she finally bid Arthur farewell at his passing, Beatrice was no stranger to heartbreak, but something within her refused to let the sorrow extinguish her devotion to joy. The months after his departure were a blur of numbness and quiet tears, yet her recollections of the love they shared and the dances they choreographed together became an internal soundtrack that guided her through the grief. Day after day she replayed the memories like old songs, letting them weave a tapestry of comfort that eventually brought her back to the realization that her spirit could still find solace in the simple act of moving gracefully through space. Over time she downsized her life, selling the apartment they had once called home and moving to a smaller house in the tranquil neighborhood that would become the setting for her midnight dancing. At first she considered teaching again, but the idea of formal lessons in a structured environment felt too restrictive, too reminiscent of a dream now relegated to the past. Instead she embraced the quiet rhythms of her senior years, taking walks at twilight and offering impromptu dance tips to any neighbor curious enough to inquire about her unwavering posture and graceful gait. Slowly she discovered that under the moon's gentle glow, the real magic of dance was stripped of pretension, allowing her to reconnect with her younger self. The girl who once discovered ballet shoes in a mirrored studio, the resilient woman who had danced through heartbreak and adversity. Each silent step taken under that street lamp became a conversation with her memories, a tribute to everything she had lost and a celebration of everything she had gained in return. Her nightly dances were, in a way, a personal pilgrimage through the decades of her life, a chance to commune with the essence of dance itself without the constraints of schedules or expectations. At times she recalled the laughter of students in the velvet room, their delighted gasps when they finally nailed a tricky spin or dip, and she would smile at the lamp as though the light's steady glow was an audience of one. Other times she heard the echoes of applause from her days performing on stage, felt again the rapid pounding of her heart just before the curtain rose, and let the memory inspire a particularly vivacious flourish. Yet the memory that most often guided her was a simpler one, the recollection of Arthur's steady hand in hers, a gentle pressure that seemed to whisper, "I'm here," no matter what storms raged outside. Dancing under the street lamp allowed her to keep that presence alive, each carefully placed footstep a kind of silent conversation with her departed love, a testament that grief could transform but never fully erase the bonds forged by true partnership. In that sense her dancing became both a tribute and a form of survival, carrying her through the solitary evenings and paving the way for the compassion she would soon offer to others in the neighborhood. For with every pivot she also remembered the struggles she had witnessed over the years, students paralyzed by insecurity, loved ones succumbing to illness, and the countless stories of heartbreak that had passed through her sphere. Rather than dwell on the sorrow, she let those recollections stir within her a renewed determination to spread even the smallest droplets of joy, convinced that there were still countless souls who needed a gentle push to believe in the beauty of life again. Though she had no grand plan to become a midnight mentor, her inner commitment to living with purpose found expression in the way she instinctively opened her arms to anyone who ventured into the lamplight. In these moments the broad tapestry of her past came together seamlessly. The rigorous training in posture and form, the heartbreak that deepened her empathy, the camaraderie of teaching couples how to move in unison, and the eternal comfort she found in Arthur's unwavering love. All of it guided the rhythm of her current life, weaving her personal history into an unspoken language that could speak directly to the hearts of strangers. The stories embedded in her muscles and bones found their way into each subtle shift of weight, each fluid turn, and each reassuring squeeze of a trembling hand, telling anyone who cared to listen that life was an intricate dance of heartache, resilience, and fleeting yet powerful bursts of joy. With this wealth of personal experience anchoring her every motion, it was no wonder that Beatrice became such a powerful source of reassurance for the lost souls who wandered by. Indeed, the trials she had endured made her infinitely patient. No story shocked her, no fear seemed too trivial or grand to be met with kindness, and no dance partner was dismissed for lack of skill or grace. Like a stone smoothed by years of running water, her spirit had been polished by both pleasure and pain, emerging with a shine that seemed to reflect a deeper, more enduring light than mere external beauty. Each night, as she stepped onto that small stage of worn asphalt, she carried with her the knowledge that her footsteps were part of a grand continuum, a life story that spanned from the rough seas of her birthplace to the final tears shed for Arthur, from cramped studios to big city stages and back again. The vastness of her experiences filled the silence with a kind of invisible orchestra, playing the songs of sorrow and triumph that only she could fully understand. Yet she never boasted of this past, never pinned her identity to her accolades or her heartbreaks. Instead she let the echoes of history guide her compassion, using dance as her medium to say, "I see you, I honor your pain, and I celebrate your capacity for joy." Each swirl of her dress at midnight was a conversation with memory, each measured turn an homage to the countless lessons life had taught her, and each spark of connection she ignited in others was a testament to her faith that no heart is too broken to be moved by kindness. Over time, Those who came to dance under the lamp began to sense a deep reservoir of wisdom behind Beatrice's gentle gaze, although she never preached or offered unsolicited advice. Instead, she infused her guidance with stories carefully plucked from her own life. An anecdote about overcoming stage fright for a performance in front of a skeptical crowd, a tender recollection of Arthur's unwavering presence, or a reminiscence of the first time her mother saw her dance and wept tears of unspoken pride. These reflections were never shared in a way that made others feel inferior or overshadowed. Rather, they served as touchstones, proof that hardships could be endured and that beauty could arise from the most unassuming circumstances. Thus, dancing under the street lamp became more than just movement. It was living testimony that the rhythms of the past could harmonize with the present, orchestrating a kind of alchemy that soothed old wounds and fueled new hope. As Beatrice's feet connected with the ground, she grounded herself in the reality of her own journey, recognizing that every heartbreak, every triumph, and every sleepless night had prepared her to be precisely the person she was now. And in that recognition, her softness toward others remained constant, as though she understood that by sharing even a fraction of her light, she could guide them toward discovering their own hidden radiance. When she finally drifted home each night, her body pleasantly exhausted, she would often stand on her porch and look at the stars, feeling both Arthur's memory and her own unwavering heartbeat reminding her that the dance of life was far from over. She felt no regret for the roads left untaken, because each twist had led her here, to a place of quiet purpose, a place where simply stepping into the dark could light up someone else's heart. With each passing day, she found fresh gratitude for the injuries, failures, and unexpected departures that once threatened to derail her, knowing they had shaped her into a woman who could understand both the euphoria and the despair that exist side by side in every human story. In this way, the sum of her experiences harmonized into a single melody, the music of resilience, compassion, and joy, a melody she gladly shared with anyone willing to take a chance on a dance at midnight. Years might have etched lines into her face, but her eyes glimmered with the eternal youth of a soul that understood the power of living in the moment, a lesson that she herself had gleaned from decades of graceful footwork, leaps of faith, and unwavering perseverance. And so, each swirl of her skirt, each silent waltz she performed alone or with a neighbor, was an act of sacred remembrance, a testament to the rhythm of reminiscence that guided her toward the quiet, shining destiny of becoming the neighborhood's midnight dancer. When the moon hung low and soft wisps of cloud draped themselves across the night sky, Beatrice's simple circle of lamplight would sometimes transform into a bustling open-air classroom for those who longed to experience the beauty of dance without the trappings of formal instruction. She found that in these unplanned gatherings, the barriers between teacher and student dissolved, allowing even the most timid newcomers to discover a kinship in the shared quest for a gentle moment of joy. The lessons themselves often began in the hush of casual conversation, a passerby remarking on the elegance of her hand placement or the graceful arc of her arms, prompting Beatrice to demonstrate how even the slightest shift of weight could create a balanced, fluid movement. Before long, a small crowd would gather, shy but intrigued, and she would encourage them to form pairs, guiding them through the basics of a waltz or a swing step with nothing more than a patient smile and the unwavering belief that everyone carries a latent spark of rhythm within. Curious onlookers who initially stood at the fringes soon found themselves pulled in by her luminous presence, compelled by a desire to feel part of the magic that transpired whenever two strangers discovered they could dance together beneath a canopy of stars. On certain nights, a lively chain reaction of laughter and tentative footwork would sweep through the circle, as individuals caught glimpses of what it felt like to loosen the grip of self-consciousness and simply let their bodies flow. Even without a traditional soundtrack, Beatrice had a remarkable way of evoking music out of thin air, tapping out a beat with her foot or humming a melody that seemed to float on the breeze, enabling people of all ages to fall into sync without overthinking each step. Teens who had mocked the very idea of ballroom dancing began to grin widely once they tried a simple spin, surprised by the rush of exhilaration that accompanied the slight off-balance thrill of trusting a partner's hold. A father whose last dance was at his wedding decades ago discovered an unexpected ease in the gentle repetition of step, step, rock, as if muscle memory slept within his limbs and only needed a subtle nudge to awaken. Single mothers twirled with a renewed sense of lightness, letting the worries of bills and responsibilities dissolve for a precious moment in the glow of street lamp and starlight. Sometimes an elderly neighbor who remembered the golden era of jazz music would croon a few notes of a beloved tune, adding a soulful undercurrent to the impromptu lesson that galvanized everyone to move with a shared sense of elation. Emboldened by the freedom of a night sky unburdened by stage lights or judgmental audiences, newcomers who had never danced in their lives discovered they could gracefully pivot and swirl, even if their technique was far from perfect. Beatrice made it clear that these were not typical classes. There were no exams, no certificates, and no strict expectations beyond the willingness to try, to laugh at mistakes, and to savor each fleeting instant of connection. She knew from experience that the best learning often happened when people were not even aware they were learning, when they could move with abandon and feel the gentle thrill of breath and heartbeat aligning with another person's pace. Many participants joked that they had wandered outside simply to walk a restless pet or take out the trash, only to find themselves moments later, clasping hands with a neighbor in a playful sway to Beatrice's unspoken tempo. That sense of spontaneity often fostered a magical camaraderie, dissolving the usual boundaries that separated people by profession, age, or social standing, uniting them instead in the universal language of motion. Sometimes, in the midst of a mild late summer evening, people forgot the time entirely, dancing for what felt like hours as the moon kept its silent vigil and the street lamp cast elongated shadows upon the pavement. When a step proved challenging, Beatrice would offer a demonstration, her movements fluid from years of careful practice, and she would laugh warmly whenever someone tripped or collided with their partner, reminding them that every error was simply another invitation to find their footing again. More than once, the spontaneous lessons turned into a sort of festive block party, with neighboring windows lighting up as curious residents peered out to see what all the laughter and gentle commotion was about. The air buzzed with the energy of people rediscovering something that often lay dormant in their daily routines. The unbridled delight of sharing an experience that required no special skill beyond a willingness to be present. Under the glow of a lamp that most had never paid much attention to, normally self-conscious adults found themselves spinning in circles, remembering a version of themselves unburdened by stress or inhibition, a version that believed in the healing power of simple joys. Children who wandered into the circle sometimes tried to mimic the steps of their elders, giggling uncontrollably when they fumbled, only to be encouraged with high fives and cheerful applause that made them feel like stars in their own right. That carefree acceptance of imperfection became a hallmark of these nightly gatherings, a gentle refusal to let fear of looking silly keep anyone from experiencing the quiet miracle of two bodies moving in harmony. Eventually, the group would fall into a natural rhythm of practice, rest, and conversation, as small clusters formed to discuss technique or share anecdotes, each new story weaving a stronger thread of connection through the impromptu community. On occasion, someone would pass around a thermos of tea or hot cocoa, and sips of warmth would briefly replace the swirl of steps, all the while fueling a sense of unity that transcended the typical anonymity of the neighborhood. What began as spontaneous lessons under the stars gradually evolved into a cherished tradition, an after-dark haven where newcomers were welcomed like old friends, and returning dancers glowed with the anticipation of exploring fresh moves and forging deeper bonds. People learned that the night, previously associated with solitude or restlessness, could be redefined as a space of possibility, where spontaneity and human connection coalesced in a dance that rivaled the patterns of the constellations overhead. Couples discovered renewed affection in each other's arms, their nighttime footwork a quiet testament to the fact that passion does not wane with age or adversity, but instead needs only a spark to reignite. Even those who came alone rarely left that way, finding partners in the form of neighbors or strangers eager to share in the pulse of a song only their hearts could hear. Laughter intertwined with the subtle scrape of shoes on asphalt, carrying a message of hope that spilled beyond the lamp's circle to brighten the entire street with a kind of shimmering aura. And through all these impromptu lessons, Beatrice remained a radiant constant, her presence as calm and unwavering as the beam of light that illuminated her weathered face and nimble feet. She took joy in watching friendships blossom over the course of an evening, as participants exchanged phone numbers, made plans for future nighttime gatherings, or even scheduled lunch dates to continue the conversations sparked by a shared dance. Occasionally, she offered a personal anecdote or a technique borrowed from her ballroom days, injecting an element of real instruction into the swirling energy, though she made sure to keep things relaxed and open-ended, ever mindful that spontaneity was the heart of these lessons. As the group grew in size over time, the space under the street lamp sometimes got cramped, prompting creative solutions like forming concentric circles or moving slightly down the block so that everyone had room to sway and turn without stepping on toes. In the glow of those moments, the street became a makeshift studio, the sky a grand cathedral of twinkling lights, and the hush of late-night traffic a steady backdrop that only amplified the community's sense of wondrous isolation from the rush of daytime life. There was an incomparable sweetness in watching an older gentleman, once too shy to dance in public, lead a beaming partner with newfound confidence, or seeing a college student, exhausted from exams, laugh uproariously after realizing she could indeed follow a basic tango pattern. The spontaneity of these lessons allowed participants to tap into the raw joy of being alive, a delight that often lay dormant beneath layers of routine and daily pressures, waiting for the slightest invitation to surface. Children learned that the night could be a time of friendship rather than fear, and parents saw their kids flourish under the encouragement of a supportive group, forging memories that would likely outlast many of their daylight activities. Every so often, the spontaneous lesson would take on a dreamlike quality, as though the dancers were part of some secret festival that appeared only when the moon rose high and the stars blinked their silent approval. Some nights, a gentle breeze carried the murmur of hushed conversation from porch to porch, reminding neighbors who chose not to join that they, too, lived in a place where beauty could be discovered in the most ordinary corners. The calls of owls or the distant bark of a dog sometimes punctuated the silence between songs that existed only in Beatrice's mind, weaving the ambience of nature into each turn and dip. Despite the late hour, more than a few participants experienced a surge of energy that lasted well into the following day, as if their cells remembered the elation of unspoken melodies shared in good company. Beatrice herself appeared ageless in these moments, her posture upright, her steps certain, exuding a warmth that seemed capable of dispelling even the most stubborn shadows lurking in hesitant hearts. As time passed, the concept of night lessons gained a certain mystique among the neighborhood's residents, with newcomers seeking out the circle after hearing about the laughter and closeness that blossomed beneath the stars. Yet the gatherings never felt crowded or commercialized, remaining intimate and sincere, grounded in the understanding that these lessons existed not for performance or profit, but for the sheer uplift of communal joy. A sense of reciprocity permeated each gathering, as if the participants intuitively recognized that Beatrice's gift of guidance needed no payment beyond genuine gratitude and a willingness to pass on the positivity they received to others in their lives. In this way, an infectious spirit of kindness took root, seeping from the midnight circle into daylight interactions, prompting once distant neighbors to greet each other warmly in the grocery aisle or wave when they spotted each other across the street. That intangible sense of community, bolstered by the memory of shared dances under the stars, gave rise to acts of neighborly goodwill, such as helping with yard work, organizing food drives, or simply checking in on those who appeared lonely. Each spontaneous lesson became a catalyst for forging deeper human connections, demonstrating that a simple pivot or twirl at midnight could reverberate through the neighborhood's collective soul, dismantling the walls of isolation one spin at a time. No matter how many times the lesson repeated, the enchantment never wore off, for every new participant brought a different energy, a distinct story, and a fresh reminder that everyone has the capacity to surprise themselves with untapped grace. Overcoming awkwardness or self-doubt during these sessions often translated into a renewed sense of courage elsewhere, an unexpected surge of self-assurance that found expression in job interviews, creative projects, or simply the resolution to face life's challenges with a little more poise. Couples who were on the brink of giving up on each other found a renewed spark in the closeness of the dance, rediscovering tactile communication that words alone could not convey. Even those who insisted they had two left feet often found themselves, after a few patient attempts, enjoying a newfound fluidity that made them forget they were dancing in the middle of a quiet residential street. Sometimes, after multiple nights of these spontaneous lessons, certain individuals would blossom into more confident dancers, eventually taking on a mentorship role to help other newcomers acclimate, a cycle of teaching and learning that Beatrice found both humbling and inspiring. The sense of time slipping away so effortlessly under the stars led to a collective desire to cherish each moment more fully, as though everyone recognized the fleeting nature of these midnight gatherings and the luminous bond they nurtured. When the clock in a nearby church tower chimed the late hour, some participants would exchange tired but delighted smiles, bidding reluctant goodbyes and promising to return on another evening, while others lingered for one last dance, hoping to prolong the magic just a little longer. Even once the crowd dispersed and the street lamp's puddle of light was left shimmering on empty pavement, the faint echoes of laughter and the soft brush of feet against concrete seemed to hang in the air, as though imprinting an invisible memory of joy upon the neighborhood. Beatrice would remain for a moment longer, drawing a deep breath of the cool night air, satisfied in the knowledge that what she offered was more than a set of dance steps. It was a lesson in how a random spark of unity could ignite when people allowed themselves to respond to life with openness. Her heart felt full each time she walked back home, the distant glow of stars still dancing in her vision, as if promising that tomorrow's spontaneous lesson would bring yet another set of new faces, new laughter, and new reasons to believe in the hidden magic that lies within the ordinary. In these small hours under the infinite sky, a sense of timelessness and universal oneness grew, fueled by the tactile language of motion shared by those who might otherwise never meet or speak. With every movement, with every slow spin that said, "I trust you," or every gentle sway that admitted, "We're in this moment together," individuals discovered the liberating power of vulnerability embraced in a safe, encouraging circle. Indeed, spontaneity became its own form of grace, releasing participants from the strict expectations of daily life, even if just for a few treasured minutes of carefree expression. The lessons under the stars served as a kind of living tapestry, woven from the threads of caution thrown to the wind, inhibitions shed and friendships formed in the hush of moonlight. Though ephemeral, each nightly gathering left a permanent mark on those who participated, seating their hearts with a quiet assurance that they could carry into the dawn. The understanding that happiness, though fleeting, is always worth seeking, and that sometimes it only takes a single dance to rekindle it. Beatrice's humility, her refusal to set herself apart as an authority figure, turned the street lamp's glow into a democratic stage, where mistakes, missteps and triumphs were shared by all and judged by none. The interplay of novices and near experts, the synergy of old and young, and the mingling of spontaneous creativity with gentle tradition combined to form a singular kind of magic that seemed to hover in the air alongside the dust motes swirling in the lamp's illumination. By the time participants returned to their homes, adrenaline still coursing through their veins, they often marveled at how a simple, unplanned dance on an ordinary street could feel so momentous and fulfilling. Months later, when the moon waxed and waned, the memory of these spontaneous lessons would still surface in idle moments, prompting a sudden smile or a fond recollection of laughter shared with someone whose name they might have never learned. In this way, the lessons held a dual resonance. They forged immediate bonds and also imparted a lasting sense of wonder, a reminder that the architecture of life's greatest joys can be built from the quiet decisions to say yes to an improbable invitation. And so, these nighttime gatherings under the stars lived on night after night, weaving their ephemeral tapestry of human warmth and gentle revelations, as Beatrice stood at the heart of it all, guiding strangers toward a dance they never knew they needed. They arrived uncertain and left with shining eyes, reminded that life's simplest pleasures are often the most profound, and that happiness sometimes emerges in the unlikeliest of places. A single pool of lamplight, a swath of asphalt under a midnight sky, and the patient voice of an elderly woman who truly believes that joy belongs to all who are brave enough to move with it. On a mild summer evening when the dusk seemed to melt into a tapestry of pink and gold, an unusual buzz filled the neighborhood as residents, both long-time and recent, converged around the old street lamp where Beatrice had danced countless nights in all kinds of weather, her devotion to joy unwavering in the face of chill winds or drizzling rain. People arrived in small clusters, some carrying wicker baskets filled with homemade treats, others clutching thermoses of tea or lemonade to share with anyone drawn into that soft circle of illumination, each arrival adding to the quiet hum of anticipation. Banners of hand-stitched cloth, repurposed from old curtains and table linens, fluttered from nearby porches, their colorful squares strung together in a tribute to the quilt of stories that had been woven under the watchful glow of the moon. Children, who only knew Beatrice from whispered bedtime tales of the dancing lady, tugged eagerly at their parents' sleeves, wide-eyed with wonder at the promise of seeing firsthand the magic that happened every night in what they had always assumed was merely a forgotten corner of the street. Their excited chatter punctuated the gentle strum of a guitar, played by a retired musician who in his younger years had performed in jazz clubs and dance halls, now choosing to serenade this gathering beneath the stars in honor of the woman who had rekindled his love of music. A mother on the edge of burnout, exhausted from the rigors of caring for two energetic toddlers, found a seat on a low stoop, the weight of her fatigue momentarily lifted by the palpable sense of camaraderie that pulsed through the warm evening air. Neighbors who had once exchanged no more than polite nods at the mailbox approached each other with easy smiles, forging connections that felt startlingly natural in an era when so many people lived behind closed doors and computer screens. In the thick of it all, the street lamp stood like a sentinel, its circle of light shimmering on the pavement as if quietly welcoming the steady stream of arriving souls, each person bearing their own burdens, hopes, and reasons for coming. Beatrice herself wore a simple dress in a soothing shade of lilac, her silver hair swept into a loose bun that seemed to glow under the lamp's comforting beam, a vision of grace in the midst of this spontaneous celebration. She moved among the crowd with a kind word here and a gentle smile there, greeting old faces with warm familiarity and newcomers with the same easy acceptance she had always extended, her joy reflected in the sparkle of her eyes. Although she had never intended to be at the center of anything more than a personal midnight dance, she couldn't deny the sense of profound gratitude that welled up in her chest at the sight of so many people gathered in harmony. Friends who had formed bonds through late-night waltzes exchanged stories about how those encounters had subtly reshaped their lives, some admitting that they felt braver, kinder, or more open to spontaneity after stepping into that circle of light. A man who had once wrestled with unemployment approached Beatrice to share that he had found not just a new job but a renewed sense of self, largely thanks to the confidence he gained by daring to dance on that lonely street, guided by her gentle encouragement. The teenage boy who had first appeared awkward and shy now spun his younger sister in an improvised swing step, their shared laughter echoing among the gathering crowd, a testament to the healing and growth sparked by each evening's movement. Even couples who had navigated conflicts or distance found themselves rediscovering a sense of unity, their clasped hands and subtle grins suggesting that past tensions had been replaced by a playful spark neither had thought to expect at this stage in life. The music was improvised by more than one source. A neighbor with a harmonica, another with a small drum, and the retired musician strumming mellow chords on his guitar, their collective output weaving a tapestry of sound that merged with the night's gentle breeze. Overhead, the stars began their nightly vigil, twinkling down as though approving of the festivities below, their faint light joining forces with the street lamp to illuminate each smiling face and swirling dress. Some people ventured into simple waltzes or quick-stepping foxtrots, while others, unsure of where to begin, shuffled and swayed with endearing awkwardness, kept afloat by the supportive cheers and guiding hands of those nearby. Here and there, someone would let out a joyous whoop upon successfully executing a spin, only to burst into a fit of laughter when the next move sent them stumbling good-naturedly into the arms of a friend or stranger. The mood was jubilant, charged by the awareness that this moment was more than just a neighborhood get-together. It was a celebration of the bonds forged under a single lamp, a tribute to the many nights when Beatrice's silent dedication had coaxed people out of their shells. As the dancing picked up pace, the street seemed to transform into a stage where no one was judged, where every participant was both performer and audience, each step an affirmation that happiness could be discovered in the most unassuming places. To the side, a long wooden table had been set up with refreshments, cups of spiced cider, plates piled with fruit tarts, bowls of freshly popped popcorn and pitchers of lemonade, each contribution labeled with little notes from those who brought them. The conversation hummed with the warmth of reunion, a steady undertone of empathy and delight that transcended differences in language, culture, or age, binding everyone present with the invisible glue of shared wonder. Children chased each other in games of tag, occasionally stumbling into the circle of dancers and giggling as an adult would whirl them around before sending them off with a playful pat on the head. Overseeing it all, Beatrice was not so much the conductor of events as a benevolent muse, her presence reminding everyone that this joyous night existed purely because, once upon a time, she chose to dance in the stillness of midnight. When someone asked if she would lead a short lesson, she obliged with a nod and an airy laugh, stepping into the circle with practiced grace to guide the group through a series of simple steps that anyone could follow. It wasn't a rigid class but an invitation for each person to find their own unique balance, to feel the rhythm in their bones, and to let spontaneity carry them through any awkward missteps. Even as people struggled to keep time or fit their feet into the correct alignment, The repeated refrain of encouraging shouts and bursts of appreciative laughter fueled their determination to master at least the basics. In that swirl of soft guitar notes, rasping harmonica and toe-tapping percussion, the sense of unity grew stronger, an unmistakable current of warmth that rose from hearts no longer guarded by fear of embarrassment or social pretense. Husbands clasped wives with renewed tenderness, dear friends locked eyes in gentle camaraderie, and solitary souls discovered partners in the unlikeliest of neighbors, forging alliances that might endure beyond the fleeting hours of dusk. For many, the real miracle wasn't their sudden proficiency in dance, but the revelation that a community could coalesce so naturally, that human beings were innately equipped to find common ground when given the slightest reason to celebrate. Underneath the exuberance ran a deeper current of reflection, as some found themselves looking at Beatrice with tears brimming at the corners of their eyes, recalling the private wounds she had helped them heal with nothing more than a heartfelt hug or a guiding hand in the darkness. A few long-time participants pulled her aside just to say thank you, confessing that they couldn't imagine how different their lives might feel now if they hadn't taken the chance to join her under that lamp one fateful night. She met each gesture of gratitude with a humble shake of her head, insisting that people gave themselves permission to be happy, and that her small role had merely been to remind them of their own capacity for joy. This moment felt like the culmination of all those solitary dances she had once performed for no audience at all, a testament that a single candle of hope, lit in the darkness, could illuminate paths for countless others. As the night deepened, those gathered around the table shared stories about how they had integrated dancing into their lives. From weekly kitchen waltzes that brought playful intimacy to hectic households, to spontaneous twirls in line at the grocery store that brought a dash of levity to humdrum routines. With each anecdote, it became clearer that what had started as Beatrice's personal ritual of resilience had blossomed into a cultural shift in the neighborhood, a quiet revolution of laughter and compassionate connection. The guitar hummed a mellow chord and a hush seemed to settle over the group, allowing the subtle sounds of the night, crickets chirping, leaves rustling, distant traffic, to blend into a soft lullaby that temporarily replaced the boisterous chatter. In that stillness, those nearest to the lamp caught sight of Beatrice spinning in a slow, solitary circle, her eyes closed, her hands lifted as if greeting an unseen partner, each step as poised and intentional as if she were gracing the grandest of ballrooms. Though the music was no more than the orchestral hush of starry silence, her expression radiated a serene joy that transcended explanation, a visible reminder of the power found in a single mindful moment. Noticing this silent display, some paused to admire her, while others instinctively placed hands over hearts, touched by the purity of her devotion to the present, to the ephemeral beauty that existed in the fleeting curve of her arms and the measured placement of her feet. When she finally opened her eyes and found so many gazing upon her with quiet wonder, she gave a self-conscious laugh and beckoned them closer as if to say, "This moment belongs to us all." Reinvigorated by her gesture, the group reformed, swirling in pairs or small clusters, stepping in time to the final chords of the evening's impromptu music, the shadows of their bodies dancing together on the pavement in elongated silhouettes. The gentle friction of shoes on asphalt provided a percussive counterpoint to the guitar's final strum, and as the last chord reverberated into a hush, everyone broke into spontaneous applause that was as much for each other as it was for Beatrice. Underneath the clapping and cheers, a few people wiped away tears, struck by the knowledge that such moments of unity do not manifest every day and that they were fortunate to have witnessed a community transcending its differences in such a heartwarming display. Slowly, people began drifting away, gathering their baskets, hugging newfound friends, and placing gentle hands on Beatrice's shoulders in farewell, acknowledging the transformative gift she had shared with them since her very first midnight dance. The night's final waltz, unaccompanied by any instrument, consisted of a handful of stragglers who remained, swaying gently in the dimming lamp glow, not wanting to break the spell too soon, even as fatigue pulled at their limbs. Beatrice parted from the gathering only when the moon stood high overhead and the hush of the neighborhood suggested that daybreak was quietly waiting its turn, her heart filled with an incandescent sense of fulfillment. Though her steps faltered slightly from weariness, she carried herself with the dignity of someone who had sown seeds of joy in fertile ground, confident that the legacy of light and laughter would flourish in her absence. Upon returning home, she reflected on how each dance, each spontaneous lesson, And each comforting word had led to this resplendent tapestry of fellowship, a testament to the simple yet profound impact of believing wholeheartedly in life's capacity for grace. Word of that evening's celebration traveled swiftly, crossing beyond the borders of the neighborhood and inspiring others in nearby communities to look for their own lamps under which to gather, their own quiet corners where they might discover the healing power of shared human rhythm. The neighborhood itself, now bound by deeper ties, maintained a quiet vow to keep Beatrice's spirit alive, organizing small but meaningful events, midnight potlucks, moonlit walks, and even occasional dance circles, ensuring that nobody forgot the gentle, unifying presence that once turned ordinary asphalt into sacred ground. In time, the story of the nightly dancing lady evolved into a local legend, recounted to newcomers who wondered why their neighbors seemed so unusually close-knit and unafraid to reach out in moments of need. Thus, a once unsung patch of pavement and its solitary lamp had been endowed with an enduring legacy, a reminder to every passerby that something as simple as a dance in the dark can birth an entire realm of light, laughter, and renewal. Even those who moved away carried a piece of Beatrice's teaching with them, incorporating small acts of spontaneous joy into their everyday lives, encouraging strangers and friends alike to remember that hope can bloom beneath the faintest glow of possibility. For her part, Beatrice never sought to place her name on plaques or to carve out any formal tribute. She found more than enough fulfillment in the knowledge that the circle of light had allowed so many hearts to realize their own capacity for wonder. In the hush that followed the evening's last dance, echoes of laughter lingered against the walls of sleeping houses, as if the very air retained a trace of the collective happiness set free in those shared steps. The circle of life, the circle of dance, and the circle of community had merged into one shimmering tapestry of human warmth that transcended petty conflicts and differences, testifying to the remarkable resilience of a community nurtured by one woman's quiet defiance of the ordinary. And in the shadows, where the light failed to reach, there lurked no sense of emptiness or sorrow, but rather the gentle promise that if one only dared to step forward, the dance would continue, guided by the memory of a gracious teacher whose legacy outshone the lamp's bright halo. Though times would inevitably change and many who danced that night would grow older or move on, the essence of what they experienced lingered like a joyful secret passed lovingly from soul to soul, ensuring that the lamp's significance would not soon fade. Indeed, whenever a newcomer asked about that particular corner, older residents would smile, recall the swirl of skirts and the hush of footsteps, and gently reply, "This is where we learned that happiness is a dance best shared." By the next dawn, the street had returned to its usual quiet, but the footprints left behind in countless hearts formed a permanent imprint, attesting that a single lamp can illuminate far more than asphalt, if only one person dares to dance in its glow and invite others to join.